Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf is a play by Edward Albee, first staged in 1962. It examines the complexities of the marriage of a middle-aged couple, Martha and George. Late one evening, after a university faculty party, they receive an unwitting younger couple, Nick and Honey, as guests, and draw them into their bitter and frustrated relationship. The play is in 3 acts, normally taking a little less than 3 hours to perform, with 2 10-minute intermissions. The title is a pun on the song, Who's Afraid of the Big Bad Wolf? From Walt Disney's Three Little Pigs, 1933, substituting the name of the celebrated English author Virginia Woolf. Martha and George repeatedly sing this version of the song throughout the play. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf won both the 1963 Tony Award for Best Play and the 1962-63 New York Drama Critics Circle Award for Best Play. It is frequently revived on the modern stage. The film adaptation was released in 1966. Written by Ernest Lehman, directed by Mike Nichols, and starring Richard Burton, Elizabeth Taylor, George C. Hegel, and Sandy Dennis. Plot summary. Act 1. Fun and games. George and Martha engage in dangerous emotional games. George is an associate professor of history and Martha is the daughter of the president of the college where George teaches. After they return home from a faculty party, Martha reveals she has invited a young married couple, whom she met at the party, for a drink. The guests arrive: Nick, a biology professor, who Martha thinks teaches math, and his wife, Honey. As the four drink, Martha and George engage in scathing verbal abuse of each other in front of Nick and Honey. The younger couple is first embarrassed and later enmeshed. They stay. Martha taunts George aggressively, and he retaliates with his usual passive aggression. Martha tells an embarrassing story about how she humiliated him with a sucker punch in front of her father. During the telling, George appears with a gun and fires at Martha, but an umbrella pops out. After this scare, Martha's taunts continue, and George reacts violently by breaking a bottle. Nick and Honey become increasingly unsettled, and at the end of the act, Honey runs to the bathroom to vomit because she had too much to drink. Act 2. Walpurgisnacht. Traditionally, Walpurgisnacht is the name of an annual witches' meeting, satiric in the context of the play. Nick and George are sitting outside as they talk about their wives. Nick says that his wife had a hysterical pregnancy. George tells Nick about a time that he went to a gin mill with some boarding school classmates, one of whom had accidentally killed his mother by shooting her. This friend was laughed at for ordering Bergen. The following summer, the friend accidentally killed his father while driving, was committed to an asylum, and never spoke again. George and Nick discuss the possibility of having children and eventually argue and insult each other. After they rejoin the women in the house, Martha and Nick dance suggestively. Martha also reveals the truth about George's creative writing escapades. He had tried to publish a novel about a boy who accidentally killed both of his parents, with the implication that the deaths were actually murder. But Martha's father would not let it be published. George responds by attacking Martha, but Nick separates them. George suggests a new game called Get the Guests. George insults and mocks Honey with an extemporaneous tale of the mousie who tooted brandy immodestly and spent half her time in the ukchuk. Honey realizes that the story is about her and her hysterical pregnancy. The implication is that she trapped Nick into marrying her because of a false pregnancy. She feels sick and runs to the bathroom again. At the end of this scene, Martha starts to act seductively towards Nick in George's presence. George pretends to react calmly, reading a book. As Martha and Nick walk upstairs, George throws his book against the door. In all productions until 2005, Honey returns. Wondering who rang the doorbell, Martha and Nick had knocked into some bells. George comes up with a plan to tell Martha that their son has died. And the act ends with George eagerly preparing to tell her in what is labeled the definitive edition of the script. However, the second act ends before Honey arrives. Act 3. The Exorcism. The term exorcism means the expulsion or attempted expulsion of a supposed evil spirit from a person or place. In this act, it seems that Martha and George intend to remove the great desire they have always had for a child. Through continuing their story of their imagined son and his death, Martha appears alone in the living room, shouting at the others to come out from hiding. Nick joins her. The doorbell rings. It is George, with a bunch of snapdragons in his hand, calling out, "Flores para los muertos." Flowers for the Dead. A reference to the play and movie A Streetcar Named Desire. Also about a marriage and outside influences. Martha and George argue about whether the moon is up or down. George insists it is up, while Martha says she saw no moon from the bedroom. This leads to a discussion in which Martha and George insult Nick in tandem, an argument revealing that Nick was too drunk to have sex with Martha upstairs. George asks Nick to bring Honey back for the final game, bringing up baby. George and Martha have a son, about whom George has repeatedly told Martha to keep quiet. George talks about Martha's overbearing attitude toward their son. He then prompts her for her recitation, in which they describe, in a bizarre duet, their son's upbringing. Martha describes their son's beauty and talents and then accuses George of ruining his life. As this segment progresses, George recites sections of the Libera-Me, part of the Requiem Mass, the Latin Mass for the dead. At the end of the play, George informs Martha that a messenger from Western Union arrived at the door earlier with a telegram, saying their son was killed late in the afternoon, on a country road, with his learner's permit in his pocket, and that he swerved to avoid a porcupine. The description matches that of the boy in the gin mill story told earlier. Martha screams, "You can't do that," and collapses. It becomes clear to the guests that George and Martha's son is a mutually agreed upon fiction. The fictional son is a final game the two have been playing since discovering early in their marriage that they are infertile. George has decided to kill him because Martha broke the game's single rule: never mention their son to others. Overcome with horror and pity, Nick and Honey leave. Martha suggests they could invent a new imaginary child, but George forbids the idea, saying it was time for the game to end. The play ends with George singing, "Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf?" to Martha, whereupon she replies, "I am, George, I am." End of the summary. Thank you.